ladies and gentlemen, if you would please settle down, we're going to begin tonight's session in about 5 minutes' time. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege and honor for us to host tonight's discussion session on one of the most important painters working in India in the late 18th century, Johann Zoffany, the German painter who worked for mostly in Britain, but came to India, spent time in India, traveled in many places in India, and worked on Indian themes. He was in Calcutta for some time. We in the Victoria Memorial Hall have 8 of his paintings, perhaps the most famous of which is not on display, which is normally on display in our Darbar Hall, Johann Zoffany's Colonel Antoine Polier and his friends, also known as Claude Martin and his friends, currently on loan to a very magnificent exhibition recently held in the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya in Mumbai, and now going to be launched in the National Museum, New Delhi, called India and the World, A History in 9 Stories. So it's an honor for us to have with us here tonight to speak on this, speak on Johann Zoffany, 2 very, very distinguished speakers and a very eminent moderator and chair. We are very grateful to Charles Greig, originally the art historical advisor to the Calcutta Centenary Project, which has such a sterling relationship of working with the Victoria Memorial Hall starting from 1990. In fact, many of our own restorers and conservators were trained by the Calcutta Centenary Project. And it's a privilege to have Charles, who has worked on Zoffany, and in fact his travels in India, to have him back here and speaking this evening on Zoffany's travels in India, the people Zoffany met, and some of his new paintings, which are not so well known. You may have seen in the invitation that, and you may have formed the impression that Charles Greig was going to speak on Zoffany's painting, The Last Supper, which is in the St. John's Church in Kolkata, which is a very subversive take on Leonardo da Vinci's original, not Da Vinci, sorry, Michelangelo's Last Supper. Sorry? Da Vinci's Last sorry, I'm just getting crazy. Yeah. Oops. Even they are protesting against my... okay, yeah, so there was some confusion about what Charles Greig was going to speak about, and originally we planned for him to speak about Zoffany and his travels, but then there was some impression received from somewhere else for which Charles is not responsible, that he is going to speak on The Last Supper, but he's not. He's going to speak on Zoffany and his travels in India and some of his less well-known paintings. It's also a great privilege to have Professor Norman Ahuja to speak on the painting that we have and which is on loan to the India and the World exhibition, Colonel Antoine Polier and his friends. Norman Ahuja, as you all know, is Professor of Arts and Aesthetics, professor at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, and he is the co-editor of the Marg magazine, and he is also the co-curator of the exhibition India and the World, which is now going to be inaugurated in this month in the National Museum in Delhi. Naman Ahuja's major publications include The Making of the Modern Indian Artist, Craftsman, Devi Prasad, which was published in 2011. The Body in Indian Art and Thought, which originally was in the form of an exhibition and then was published in 2013. And The Arts and Interiors of Rashtrapati Bhavan, Lutyens and Beyond, published in 2016. And his latest curatorial venture is the exhibition, as I said, India and the World, A History in 9 Stories, soon to be inaugurated in New Delhi. It's a great honor, as always, to have Professor Tapati Guha-Thakurta, one of the most eminent historians of our time, to agree to chair this session and moderate the discussion. Professor Guha-Thakurta, we always look towards her when we need somebody to inaugurate or chair and speak on anything, and she has very graciously agreed to do this. She has herself used Zoffany's paintings in her work on art history. She is very well known all around here, so I'm not going to speak anything about her. So that's all I have to say for now. Johann Zoffany's work will be analyzed, and his connection with Calcutta will also be explored, I guess. And so without further ado, I would request Professor Tapati Guha-Thakurta, the chair of this evening session, as well as the two speakers, Mr. Charles Greig and Professor Naman Ahuja, to come up on the stage, please. And I would hand over the proceedings to Professor Guha-Thakurta. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be back here in Calcutta. My family have a very long connection with this city. My direct ancestor on my mother's side came to Calcutta in 1766, and the family had retained connections right up until the late 1950s. I myself worked here over 3 winters as the art historical advisor to the Calcutta Tercentenary Trust in the early 1990s. I was able to study the entire collection. And there is no doubt at all in my mind that the collection here in the Victoria Memorial is the finest group of paintings that exists anywhere in the world relating to India by European artists. But let me start with Zoffany. Zoffany is by far the most important of the European painters ever to visit the subcontinent. He was of German origin, born in 1733 in Regensburg in Germany. And in 1760, he came to London and very quickly came to the notice of the royal family, and he became the court painter to Queen Charlotte. In the 1770s, he traveled in Europe and painted the imperial family of the Empress, Maria Theresa. So why, after such a dazzling career in Europe, did an artist like Zoffany decide to come to India? Well, by the late 1770s, his type of painting, his intimate conversation pieces, were beginning to go out of fashion in Europe. And there was a new fashion for much looser, grander, more opulent paintings, typical of artists like Reynolds and Gainsborough. But, and Zoffany was no stranger to travel. He had, in the 1750s, as a very young man, he traveled overland from Germany to Italy. And again in the 1770s, he traveled overland from Great Britain to Florence and to Rome. And in 1772, he was actually appointed to be the official artist for the second Cook voyage, which would have taken him right round the world. And unfortunately, this was cancelled at the very last minute because Sir Joseph Banks withdrew from the expedition. And this always rancored with Zoffany. He had an adventurous spirit. But the chief reason he came to India was to make money. This might come as something of a shock to you, but he saw, coming to India, the opportunity to make enough to live on for the rest of his life. He'd heard that Tilly Kettle and another artist of very, very modest ability, George Willison, had returned to Europe from India with immense fortunes. And it was even rumored in London that William Hodges, the landscape painter, was doing extremely well for himself. His fellow Royal Academician in London, Sandby, wrote that Zoffany expects to roll in gold dust. And indeed, he fulfilled his objective. But what I hope to show is that actually his 5.5 years in India were much more than an exercise just in making money. Having obtained permission from the East India Company to travel to India, he set out in April 1783 on the long and difficult journey to India. I found a very good account of such a journey in Twining, written by Thomas Twining a few years later, and he describes the appalling conditions, the cramped conditions, the fetid atmosphere, the uneatable food on board an East Indiaman. So it must have been with great relief that Zoffany arrived first in Madras in July 1783. And he was introduced to the governor, Lord Macartney, and in a period of 5 weeks, he painted 4 paintings in Madras. Macartney was sufficiently impressed by Zoffany that he furnished him with letters of introduction to the Governor General, Warren Hastings here. Unfortunately, the portrait that Zoffany painted of Macartney is missing. We have no idea where it is. But a few years ago, this painting came to light, and it's of George Maule, who was the chief engineer in Madras at the time, and it must have been painted extremely quickly. And the identification of this painting enabled me later to identify other lost pictures. The style is very different from what he was doing in Europe because the speed with which he had to paint. As I say, he painted 4 pictures within the short period of 5 weeks, and therefore it's extremely sketchy in its the way that it's painted. It also, this is a transitional painting that looks back to some of Zoffany's theatrical paintings that he'd done back in London for the great actor Garrick. Zoffany rejoined his ship and arrived in Calcutta in August 1784, and he was immediately introduced to the Governor General, Warren Hastings. He had letters of introduction from Macartney, but he also would have been introduced to Hastings by his old friend William Hodges, the landscape painter who was just preparing to leave Calcutta and go back to Europe. And Hodges would have also given him a lot of information about his own travels in Upper India. This painting of Warren Hastings is in the Victoria Memorial, and it shows the Governor General with his wife and a young and very beautiful servant girl. It's situated in Alipur, and the house it was Hastings' private house, which still survives to this day and is a ladies' college. It's a surprisingly awkward portrait. Hastings' wife didn't particularly take to India, and her strained face, I feel, shows her something of her distaste for her surroundings, and that again is shown in the rather awkward way that her hand is conjoined with her husband's. Zoffany remained in Calcutta for nearly a year, until May 1784. And at the invitation of the Governor-General, he was invited to Lucknow. Hastings had already left in February, the very best time of year to travel. But Zoffany, because he had so many commissions in Calcutta, and I might say it was reported in the press that in the first year and a half he had remitted back to London £36,000, which was an unbelievable sum. It was literally crores and crores and crores of rupees in today's money. So he was doing very well. He had huge numbers of commissions. And he didn't leave till May, the very worst time of the year to travel. And he had an extremely difficult journey. And we know this from a letter that was written by Sir William Jones to his legal amanuensis from Bhagalpur, in which he commented on Zoffany's uncomfortable and difficult journey, particularly related to language and customs. This is Reynolds' map of 1786 of the area that Zoffany traveled in. And basically, Zoffany's journey took him 700 miles from Calcutta up as far as Raj Mahal. And I haven't got time to go into great detail about his journey, but I'll just give you some outline of it. He would have taken a budgerow or pinnace from the Ghats here, up the river, past the European settlements, as far as stopping in Murshidabad, where he probably stayed with Sir John and Lady Doyley in their absolutely wonderful house called Afzal Bagh, and he painted Sir John Doyley and Lady Doyley there. He then travelled further upriver, still by boat, as far as Suti. And at Suti in May, the river became impassable, and he would have had to abandon his budgerow. And from there onwards, he would have either been carried in a palanquin, or he would have travelled on horseback. He would have followed the great Mughal trunk road that follows close to the river. He would have first of all gone due north through Raj Mahal, as far as Sikra Gully. This is a painting that has very recently come to light, and by recently I mean literally in the last few months. Nobody had any knowledge of it before that. It shows the hill that you can see, that hill there is actually the point of Sikra Gully. And I think this painting shows how he would have travelled, not on his upward journey, because he made 3 different journeys back and forth to Calcutta in his 5.5 years. I think this is a painting showing an encampment such as he would have travelled with when he was travelling with Claude Martin. And he came backwards and forwards to Calcutta twice with Claude Martin. And it shows the great number of, that's probably his own horse in the center, and it was probably one of Claude Martin's elephants. This is a particularly fine painting. It's in superb condition, and nobody ever knew about it. We didn't even know about it at the time of the Zoffany exhibition in 6 years ago. The river turns sharply west at Sikra Gully, and he would have continued travelling on the old road through Patna. And this painting is also in the Victoria Memorial. It's called The Embassy of Hyderabad, but actually that title is somewhat misleading. Hyderabad was on his way to Calcutta, and Zoffany accompanied him. But actually, Hyderabad is very incidental to the whole scene. Heidelberg is seen disappearing into the distance. This is Heidelberg's train in the far distance on the way to the Gola in Patna, which you can see on the left. This painting wasn't done in India. It was done many years later, back in England. And the Gola is probably a reference to his support for Warren Hastings at the time of Warren Hastings' trial in London. The whole emphasis of the painting is on these two magnificent elephants, and also the great number of different figures that we see. I think it's a synthesis of his memories of travel on the great road, the Great Mogul Road. In the far left is Zoffany himself on horseback, just there, and on the elephant behind is Sir John Kennaway, who was also accompanying Heidelberg and Zoffany, who is trying to control his elephant because the elephant in front has run amok. There are many other different types of figures. There are soldiers, there's a Capuchin friar, there was